Hey, Axiom Fox, how's it going? Good evening to you as well. Hey, Nosy Matt. What's up, Charles? Yeah, chill Sunday night stream. Hey, MF Dur, Floyd Akash, Henry. We got all the usual suspects in the chat. I like it. And Jovis, Dayon, Yanav KZ. Yeah, this is a very red layout, isn't it? Man, it's Sunday, Bloody Sunday, so I just decided to go all red. If you put your money on red for this stream, you are bound to win a lot of money. Yeah, I even got the matching going. You guys know I don't forget details. Hey, BL Swagger. Yeah, my pleasure, little board. Thank you for watching them. Experimental stream, experimental layout. So I'm going to show some games today. Just a few games. This won't be a super long stream. Famous last words, right? But I'm going to go over 3 games showing a opening that I have some experience in from both sides of the board. It's not even really an opening. It's more of a setup. It's not fair to just put it in a concrete opening category. It's a setup that you can employ whether you're white or black. Capybara says, is this the start of the fashion series then? Negative, but I could see why you would think that with all red. Henry, you're gonna leave and go golfing in the middle of the stream. Well, if the weather's good, I can't blame you for that. Hey, Zion Canyon. Nice job, 4 squared 2. He said he played his first tournament today and scored 3 out of 5. Positive score. That's good. Yeah, the layout's not perfect. I got to match like this color, for instance, to the actual background color. But I do kind of like the red, the deep red color. Just trying to mix it up. Nosy Matt says, Monday here already. Uh-huh. You must be in Europe or somewhere else. Somewhere ahead of us here. So we're going to get started in just a second. Just making sure everything is running properly here. Oh yeah, I see myself on stream. All right, not bad. I think I could put something in like the right corner of this layout, but for now it's fine. I'm thinking about putting in the future like teaching points in that quadrant of the layout. I think that would be good. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to get right into it because we got a few games to go over. And this is, as I said, an experimental stream just for teaching on Twitch. You don't really see too many people doing pure teaching streams on Twitch. Of course, there are instructional streams where people are playing chess and obviously talking about their strategy as they play, same as always. But I don't know that I've seen anyone do like an actual, I don't know, pedagogical lesson, a full lesson, if you will, on Twitch. So that's what I'm going to do here. So we're going to talk about the Hedgehog. Not the animal, but the chess setup. I played it for both white and black. I have more experience on the black side of the Hedgehog, and I think as far as teaching this setup, that's what we're going to look at. Although, again, you can play it as white, but more often you get into it as black if you try to play it at all. Hey, Daboy Trouble. Okay, so I'm going to put up the first game we're going to go through. So 2 of these 3 games were played by me. And 1 is a famous game played by Bobby Fischer against Ulf Andersson. If you study chess, very likely that you've seen this Fischer game I'm going to put up. But I'm not going to spend too much time on that one because it's only going to illustrate one particular plan. But this first game we're going to look at, I played in 2011 at the Manhattan Open. And I'm going to flip this around. We're going to see it from my perspective. Yeah, so 2011 at the Manhattan Open in New York. I was living in New York at that time, so I didn't even have to go very far to play this tournament. And this was round 2, I believe, of the event. Playing a player from the Netherlands, I want to say, Hans Scoot, 2142 FIDE. And my FIDE was 2442, so I outrated him by exactly 300 points in this game. He opened with e4, and I played the Sicilian. So if you're looking to get into a Hedgehog, and it's okay if you have no idea what the hedgehog is right now. A Sicilian against e4 is probably your best bet. It's not impossible to get into it via other setups, I suppose, but a Sicilian is by far your best bet. So my opponent plays knight f3, I play e6, and he plays c4. So that's a bit of a departure from the usual move here, which is d4, leading to the open Sicilian. He plays c4, and once he played this move, I had a feeling I would already get my desired hedgehog setup. At that time, I was happy to go into this if I was black. So yeah, I was already looking forward to playing that setup. And yeah, guys, feel free to ask questions as I go. I won't be stopping and addressing every question, but I'll keep an eye on the chat, and if there's something relevant, I'll address it. And also probably after the game, I'll go through if you guys have any questions. This was not at the Marshall Chess Club. This was at a hotel. Don't remember exactly what hotel it was, but yeah, it was in Manhattan. Okay, so I played a6, and this is consistent with the con, putting the pawns on e6 and a6. But again, because white has played c4, we're likely to get into a different setup entirely. A6, though, very helpful move, controls b5 in so many cases, and this is the prelude to the hedgehog setup. So he plays knight c3, and I play queen c7. He goes bishop e2, and I play d6. So already I'm just establishing my pawns on desirable squares, controlling many squares in front diagonally. And now he plays d4. So it's possible white could try to play this position without d4, but with these pawns situated where they are, he's going to have a hole on this square if he doesn't go for d4 soon. I might even switch up plans. Like, let's say he were to castle here. I'd think about playing knight c6. I don't know if I would start with this move, but just to illustrate, like if he doesn't go for d4, something like this could happen. And it's possible I could get a good clamp on this square myself and maybe plant a knight there coming up. So it is in white's best interest to try to get in d4, I think. Otherwise, I don't see a useful break. These pieces are not, even though white does have better development here, it's not really going to matter if the position is closed. So d4, I take. He takes. And now I start trying to develop knight f6. And here I play b6. Okay, so by the time that this move is played, I have now set up the quintessential hedgehog setup. So black has pawns on e6, d6, b6, and a6. That is the hedgehog setup with your pawns. The hedgehog gets his name because if you think of these pawns as quills on a hedgehog, they are spiky, controlling all of this territory, preventing the enemy invaders from harassing you. So like white's knights in particular cannot effectively jump to squares that they would like to go to hit my queen and work their way into the position. So that is why it's called the hedgehog. You get the spiny setup. And even though, as Sergei Shipov points out, he has a 2-volume series. He's a Russian grandmaster, fantastic writer, also a fantastic commentator. But he has a 2-part series on the hedgehog called The Complete Hedgehog, volumes 1 and 2. And he goes into a lot of the imagery with the hedgehog. But even though you think of the hedgehog as perhaps maybe a purely defensive animal, like you don't really think of the hedgehog as attacking something, it does have a lot of fierce potential if you can harness that and utilize it and unleash it at the right time. So keep that in mind as we go through these games, because even though the hedgehog looks purely defensive at the moment, it does contain a lot of kinetic energy, and many people have been burned trying to overextend against this setup or trying to pierce it, and really just dealing with the counterattacks is difficult in the hedgehog. So yeah, someone says Grandmaster Suba was an expert in the hedgehog. That's exactly right. So b6, my opponent castles. I played bishop b7. So where is black going to put their pieces in this setup? Because we got these pawns controlling all these squares. That's nice, but where do the pieces go? So your kingside knight almost always goes to f6. This bishop is definitely best off on this diagonal, fianchettoed, where it can hit the e4 pawn and it will have a lot of influence later. And therefore, this knight should usually go to d7. So if you put it on c6, it's going to block the bishop, and sometimes you can run into problems down the c file. So this knight should go here, where it doesn't encumber the bishop. It also helps defend this knight on f6, perhaps. And this bishop, usually going to e7, I have seen some hybrid setups, I've even used them myself, where black plays g6 and bishop g7 and fianchetto's on the other side of the board. Downside of that is that d6 could be a little tender. So in this game, I adopt the real standard Hedgehog setup. He plays f3 because notice the e4 pawn is hit twice. So he just guards that. I play bishop e7. He goes queen d2, bringing his queen out, connecting his rooks. I castle, rook d1, rook fd1, knight bd7, and he plays rook a c1. Okay, so for those of you who are more advanced, the move orders getting into this sort of thing and all of the myriad of move orders that you have in the Hedgehog are important and you want to study them closely. But since this is an introduction video, I'm just going to focus on like this setup and what the plans are from here. Mostly from the Hedgehog player's point of view. But yeah, the move orders leading up to this are subtle. You can't just like toss out these moves and expect to get a good version of a Hedgehog every time, because a savvy player might try to interrupt what you're doing. So I'd say so far, both sides have played like bog standard moves, especially White. White has developed their pieces to squares that you see time and time again in the Hedgehog. Like nothing is amiss. These bishops are usually best placed here. The bishop on e3 is especially nice. That's a good piece for White. Helps control d4, kind of looking at the king side. The light square bishop's a bit locked in by White's pieces, but at least it's not on d3 where it's perhaps blocking play down the d file. The rooks are on useful files. A lot of the action in the Hedgehog can take place on these two files, and also to some extent the e file as well, which we'll talk about. But yeah, this rook placement is totally normal for White. And here, I play rook ac8. So I've got my minor pieces situated how I want them. And now I play rook c8. Your queenside rook usually is going to go to this square, or a rook in general, because you might use the f rook to go there. I guess that was confusing how I said it. A rook usually goes to c8, whether it's the kingside rook or more likely the queenside rook. Like the classical way of playing this position is just rook ac8. But I have seen some players play rook fc8, anticipating a lot of the action on the queen side. You might want the rook here in some cases. But the way that I learned this opening originally, you put the rook on c8. He goes bishop f1. Now, there's a lot of maneuvering in the Hedgehog. Very often, you'll see Hedgehog games where it looks like for the first, 25, 30 moves, both players are just jockeying for a position, moving their pieces around. And especially trying to anticipate like where the game will open up. So because of Black's setup, it's not easy for White to just like bull rush this setup, Trying for some sort of pawn break is not going to work. Black has all of the sensitive squares on the 5th rank covered. So bishop f1, just a flexible move, makes way for the queen to come to f2, also vacates the e2 square. So now I play rook fe8. And this is one thing I found interesting when I started playing this opening. So rook fe8, it looks like a mysterious move because isn't the e file completely closed? And yes, it is completely closed now. I would say most people, if they're going to move a rook, they're probably going to put it on d8 because that's where White's queen is. And also, in the Hedgehog, one of the main breaks that you want to look at, and this is true for Sicilians in general, but in the Hedgehog, one of the main pawn breaks that you're going to be looking at is pawn to d5. Advancing, trying to attack these guys, and especially opening your pieces up. That's a move that's characterized by counterplay from Black if it does actually occur. So d5 is one of the principal pawn breaks. Also b5. And I know both of these pawn breaks look far-fetched at the moment, but d5 and b5 are the pawn breaks that you want to look at for Black later on. Now, what does that have to do with the rook? And at first sight, it looks like this rook should be behind a future d5 break, but it's been shown in many Hedgehog games that the rook actually stands better on e8, because if d5 is to occur, and you imagine like these two pawns in particular getting traded, it's much more dynamic and better for Black if the rook is on the e file. There's even some cases, I remember a game of, I believe, Ulf Andersson's, where he played Karpov, where the rook may sacrifice itself for this bishop on e3, this very valuable dark square bishop. So yeah, even though this rook looks worse off on e8 than d8, most of the time in the Hedgehog, you want your rook there and the other rook on c8. You could leave this d8 square open. And there's one more reason that you want the d8 square open, which will be revealed in a second. Thanks, Sir Callan. I love you as well. So my opponent plays queen f2 here. And this just gets the queen off of the d file. He also reminds me in the future that I might have some issues with the b6 pawn if he moves this knight away. This is a sensitive pawn for black in this opening. So he sets up a little battery here. I don't actually like the way that white played the next few moves. So I'm not going to offer too many suggestions for him, improvements that is right now, because there's a game, the last game we're going to look at, where I really liked what white did against me. So queen f2. And now I play queen b8. Queen b8, just withdrawing the queen. Again, another mysterious move. Like, why would you put your queen on the back rank? Isn't that really passive? Well, a couple reasons. So one, we got to anticipate action down the c file. If I'm ever to break with d5, or b5 for that matter, it's an imperative that my queen is not standing on c7. You know, let's just say we play d5 here. This would be suicidal because white has this rook on c1. After takes and takes, white is already ready to unleash that rook with a discovery. So we put the queen on c7 early in the game, but that's not its ideal square. Usually you want that queen tucked back a little bit. The position is not nearly open enough for the queen to do damage. Both queens, in fact. I mean, the other pieces are going to be doing the heavy lifting in a position like this. So queen b8, sophisticated move, tuck the queen away. Also having the rook look at the c4 pawn, so white can't completely forget about this pawn. And this sets us up well for the future if we ever want to break with one of these guys. So now my opponent plays king h1. Again, not a big fan of how my opponent played this opening, but I guess I can see some merit to this move. He does free up the g1 square, which I know, like, that doesn't seem like it could be useful coming up, but in some cases it could. For instance, if ever I get in d5 and I reposition this bishop to d6, that is a prime target, the pawn on h2. So I guess I see some merit to that, but, you know, out of the fireplace into the fire, right? Wait, how does that saying go? I always get that saying wrong. It's not out of the fireplace into the fire, is it? I shouldn't use sayings that I can't remember. But anyways, what I was saying was that even though he moves the king off of a square where it could be a check if I eventually take that pawn and maybe allows for queen g1. The frying pan, yeah, the frying pan. Thank you, guys. Out of the frying pan into the fire. So I also have this light square bishop that is patrolling this diagonal, and his king is on that same diagonal, even though there's a lot of stuff in between here. So it's not a complete solution. Yeah, I'm having massive deja vu because, I messed up that saying on a stream a little while ago, too. All right, so king h1. And now, any guess what black is going to do next? And I kind of hinted at it when I was talking about why the rook was better here versus here. I want to see if anyone knows this. So feel free to type in the chat, what do you think I'm going to do next? Five card draw says, I love the coil spring effect and the energy behind those baselines of a cramped looking position. I find it hard to see, but I cannot handle this position myself, so I avoid positions like this. Yes, this is a position where, or a setup rather, you wouldn't want to go into this as black unless you have a plethora of plans and an understanding of what you're going to do in the middle game. Because otherwise, I agree, it just looks cramped. Even players who are experienced in handling the hedgehog, occasionally they suffer defeats where their opponent just encroaches on them, and that space disadvantage really does come to tell. Because yes, black is taking on a significant space disadvantage here. He's basically allowing white to do whatever he wants on the first four ranks, and even to some extent the fifth rank. So the fifth rank is the rank of dispute here. So we've got some guesses in the chat. Domo said queen a8. Avi G said d5. Potzer de Master said bishop d8 c7. Illuminata said bishop f8. Flick said d5. Dude is Dudette said bishop d8. Okay, so several people know the move that I played here coming up. So this is called the samish maneuver. Yeah, named after Fritz Samish. So yes, it is bishop d8. Not the only move here, but this is a key maneuver to know in the hedgehog. We're going to reposition this bishop to c7. which in doing so, even though it's still blocked in by these pawns, that will add a lot more force to an eventual d5 break. If we get d5 in, it's just super nice to have influence down this diagonal, be threatening the h2 pawn. So yeah, bishop d8. You know, a couple people were mentioning queen a8. What's funny is when I first started studying the Hedgehog, I also thought that queen a8 was kind of a standard looking move. Because if you play that move, yeah, you have more influence here, like maybe you can get d5 in. But more often than not, like queen d8 is not played. Or queen a8, rather. And I'm trying to pinpoint like exactly why. I guess it's mainly the fact that this diagonal is more promising once things open up. Also, sometimes you might have problems with b6. Because with the queen on b8, if white ever gets real gung-ho about attacking b6, you can sometimes just play bishop a8 and have the queen defend this pawn. So yeah, queen a8, surprisingly, you don't often see that move in these lines. A couple people mentioned another plan, which we're going to look at coming up. But yeah, bishop d8, samish maneuver, standard idea for black. I will say here, this is an optimal circumstance for black to do it because white does not have pressure on d6. This knight is blocking the rook. I can get away with temporarily weakening d6 to reposition the bishop. Yeah, also someone said queen a8 would lose sight of the d-pawn. That could be a reason too. Okay, so here my opponent played queen g1. Yeah, looks very passive, but I think he was anticipating that I'm going to go bishop c7 and play d5, so he wants that h-pawn already defended. Someone was asking about g2, g3 as a defense. Problem for white is you don't really want to touch these pawns too much because there will be some sort of weakness or a general weakening of this diagonal. You know, if white plays g3, for instance, to try to block this eventual thing, well, now I'm really licking my chops even more about d5 because the f3 pawn is weakened. White is removing solid defenders on this diagonal leading towards his king. So he's got to be real careful. Ideally, white would not touch these pawns at all if black is really gunning for this long-term pressure against the king. So bishop d8, he plays his queen g1 move. I go bishop c7. And now, finally, white starts to play a little actively. So he plays b4, pushing on the queen side. We've been talking about what black is trying to do, you know, in my pawn breaks and how I'm repositioning my pieces. But if we look at this from white's perspective, white's chances lie in the center and on the queen side especially. The queen side is white's domain. I am hoping to keep the queen side closed for now. b5 is pretty much the only major queenside lever or motif that I'm going to consider here as black. But white, on the other hand, they would love to open up the queen side, play on the side of the board where they're stronger, and try to distract me from eventually going after their king or counterattacking in the middle even. So b4, probably an overdue move for white. Now here again, let's think about what black can do. You know, I could certainly think about playing d5, but I don't think the circumstances are quite right to do that. Let's just look at an example line. So if d5 is played, you know, we got this bishop and queen here. Maybe we're eager to unleash it even though h2 is guarded. After takes, and another trade. Let's say white takes with the knight first. Although actually maybe taking with the pawn is a little bit better. Let's say pawn takes. So pawn takes, black takes back here, and we get this trade going. I could see big problems here, because for one thing, the a6 pawn is undefended. White can just scoop that up. Also, this bishop is loose here. A lot of times you have to watch out for knight f5 with the rook attacking that. And I don't really have like the inroads I would like on the king side. I will say that when you're going for d5 as black in the Hedgehog, usually you're not doing it in order to just like swap everything in the middle. You're doing it more so to unleash your pieces, and in some cases just straight up sacrifice a pawn for activity. So d5 is not quite available here. You might have seen the move that I played next. It's kind of a weird looking move. But I played h5 here. Okay, so h5. This is another key plan to know for black in this line. It seems to come out of left field. Harry the h-pawn, yes. Simon would be very proud if he were here. Simon would probably have played this move 10 moves ago. But yeah, h5. Again, strange move to play because, yes, it does weaken our king slightly. But the dynamics of this move work for black and are appropriate here, because I said that white doesn't really want to touch these pawns. So we can actually think about throwing this pawn all the way down the board. That's my plan with this move. I'm just going to throw it all the way down the board to h3 to get rid of this g2 pawn, try to further weaken this diagonal. I'm thinking long term, how am I going to pry open that diagonal, get in d5 at an appropriate moment, and enlisting the help of my h-pawn is really nice. There's another plan here, which I'll mention in the next game. So if you can take a mental snapshot of this picture, or you can always go back and look at this since this is on video. But yeah, h5. And this is part of the reason I really like this setup, and I think it's fun to play. Even though I don't completely trust the hedgehog sometimes. There's just all these like fun maneuvers and ideas where if you learn them, you can implement them quite nicely in your games. And often they're a big surprise to your opponent. So, you know, already this little like bishop maneuver, the samish maneuver snaking over here, and suddenly like an h-pawn push that comes out of nowhere. So now my opponent plays knight b3. He withdraws his knight. So now the rook is staring at this pawn. He has a little more pressure here. I do have both these pawns sufficiently guarded for now, so no big deal. I think he mainly played this move to discourage me from playing d5, because now he has 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces and pawns protecting that square. So he's going to say, you know, if you want to play d5, you got to make it a true gambit, like a true daily double. So I think this is a helpful move. At the same time, though, I mean, he already might want to consider how he's going to deal with this pawn. You know, h4 looks like a radical reaction, but maybe this move isn't so bad. I remember thinking in the game it was likely he was going to move his h-pawn to try to meet my h-pawn, either h4 or when I play h4, him playing h3. But he never did, actually. I'm trying to remember, so this game was played in 2011, so it's been a while, but I think I remember thinking that if this move is played, maybe I'll switch and try to go after that, like knight e5, perhaps looking to go to g6 in the future. Yeah, and it does weaken that diagonal in general, so I can understand why he didn't play it. So knight b3, I play h4, so I'm going to continue with my plan. JC Sill says, cool concept, put your pieces on the queen side and then attack on the king side. Yeah, that's the real inherent potential behind those bishops here. Slicing on this diagonal, yeah. Don't disturb the hedgehog. So h4, and he plays bishop f2. Yeah, I'd say here pushing the h-pawn is probably less appealing, because if h3, because my pawn is no longer here, I have knight h5 opened up. So knight h5 looking to jump into g3. That looks a lot more alarming for white than the previous version of this with pawns on h5 and h4. Felix Chess, thanks for the 100 bits. So h4, and he plays bishop f2. So he moves his bishop back, but I didn't like this move for him because it just encourages me to play the move I intended to play all along. It's like, why force your opponent to continue with their plan unless their plan is clearly bad? Maybe he didn't believe h3, I don't know. But yeah, I'm totally willing to sacrifice this pawn, double up his h-pawns to weaken that diagonal. So h3 it was, he took it, and I play knight e5. So white's queen is staring at my king on this diagonal, but he's not in a good position to attack me. Even if somehow he whipped up something down the file, like I could always just plant this knight on g6, and I think he'd have a real hard time getting through. So knight e5, and by this point, this is move 21, I was already getting pretty excited because I was seeing where this was going to go. Gain a tempo by attacking the f3 pawn, so he's got to do something about that. You know, f4 trying to move forward, again, that's suicidal here. I think I can just play knight takes e4 immediately because I've got this bishop sitting here. But yeah, he doesn't want to allow any further weakening of this position. That pawn needs to stay on f3. So knight e5, he plays bishop e2. And now I play d5. At long last, this pawn break, which I've been, you know, extolling the virtues of, d5. And this is real good timing because I feel like I've done enough to weaken that diagonal, and my pieces have been improved to almost like their total optimal positions. It's time to unleash them and really get at that king and take over the initiative. So d5. But this is another pawn sacrifice. Again, I'm not playing d5 just to swap everything off. That should be pretty clear here because I only have 3 defenders, and again, white has 4 attackers on d5. So I'm not playing that just to liquidate stuff. I'm playing it to get these pieces out on the diagonal. And also open up the e-file. So he takes with the c-pawn, I take back. He takes with the e-pawn. And I'm down 2 pawns right here, but I have an initiative. Also, like just generally, structurally, white is very loose here. He's got these extremely ugly doubled isolated h-pawns. f3 is isolated. Even these pawns are looking loose. Yeah, it's not great. So, I found sometimes in these positions, even if your attack doesn't immediately crash through, sometimes when the pace of play slows down a little bit, you might just be harvesting weak pawns, just going and taking them. So here, I played a retreat move. I played knight g6. Kind of a weird looking move at first sight, but I can use the f4 square in the future for my bishop or maybe even my knight. The rook is now involved. Remember that rook? And I was talking about why it's better on the e-file versus the d-file. Good example right here. The d-file, there's not much going on unless I want to try to win the pawn back, which I've already said I don't really want to do. So the rook peering at the bishop, though, which is a key defender of this f3 pawn, that is important. So knight g6. How's it going, Dr. Usadik? 5-card draw asks, why did white give himself doubled pawns? Couldn't he play g3 and then take with the bishop? Yeah, so I think g3, we'll back up for just a second because that is a good question. g3, I think, has the same problem in that the f3 pawn is weak. So if he plays g3, I'll still play knight e5, and I am very happy to trade this h-pawn for that valuable f3 pawn. I think he can almost resign if that happens. So let's just say he does this. I take f3 with tempo on the queen. Queen g2, you already start getting sick to your stomach here if you're white. Again, I think I can play knight takes e4 right away. This is just the diagonal of death for him. Queen takes here, knight takes f2. Everything falls for white. So if after g3, knight e5, he were to just play a defensive move on the other hand, like bishop e2 again, that pawn here could actually be pretty helpful with Matisse on the diagonal. If he plays knight d2 to try to defend here, I think that adds even more emphasis to d5. And often I see white having this sort of dilemma in the Hedgehog. It's like he has to deal with these small thrusts that black is making, these small attacking moves, but it can quickly snowball. And because your position is so extended, you do have all this space, but it leaves behind all these weaknesses in its wake when you push these pawns. And that's often what white is dealing with here. But good question, though. So back to this position where I played knight g6. Okay, so now here he played a very reckless move. His position is not good, but the next move, this really opens the floodgates. So he plays bishop takes b6. Takes that pawn off. Probably, naturally, hoping to trade down a little bit, just simplify the position. He is up 3 pawns now. And I think this moment is actually where I don't quite recall, but I either missed what I could do here, or I just decided that the move I played in the game was so strong, I didn't even want to consider the other line. But in hindsight, there's a line that just, I think, wins easily here for black. And I wonder what you guys think it is. Or what would you play if you were black? Joke says, you're allowed to move the knight backwards. Yes, I know, right? Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay. I'd say there's probably a 20-second delay or so. D. Graybill says bishop e5, which would attack this knight on c3 twice, but I do block the e-file that way. Braden Laughlin says bishop takes b6. Infinite Flash says the same thing. They both see the tactic. And Ricardo Dominguez and War of Ideas said the move that I played. I think they're both very strong, but I think bishop takes b6 followed by rook takes c3 is the easiest way here, yes. So I can take, he has to take back, and now remove the defender of this bishop on e2. Rook takes c3, pretty much has to take it, takes. And now black is threatening mate with that long distance queen on b8. And I think this would just be winning. White would have to play something defensive here. Because If he tries to block the queen on this diagonal, then note that this queen, it's in line with my queen, and I can unleash that with bishop takes f3 with check, pick up the queen next move, game over. So what else can white really do here? You know what? Actually, I am starting to remember now. I think the reason I didn't go for this line was because of queen c7. And I thought there might be some messiness and some work to do. I swear I didn't remember that just till now, but it's funny, like looking back on games that you played a while. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I calculated this line in the game, and I thought after queen c7 this might be a little unclear. But I ran this through the engine right before I went live here, and yeah, it said this is like completely winning for black. But I think I wanted to keep the queens on the board. I knew that I had great attacking potential, and even though I do win 2 minor pieces for a rook here, it still looks kind of messy, at least to my human eye. So yeah, that is good. You could totally play that way if you're black. But bishop f4, this seemed real thematic to me. Because I have in mind similar ideas. I'm still threatening rook takes c3 followed by rook takes e2. But I'm also adding in the bishop's attack on the rook on c1. And also it's just fun to play a position where you're down 3 pawns, but you have more than sufficient compensation. So he plays, at this point, a decent attempt. Plays bishop c5. So if you were to move the rook, if you were to play the most greedy move possible, just trying to save the rook, again, I'm crashing through here, takes and takes. I still have this threat on h2, and notice that the c7 square is better guarded for me this time because my queen and bishop are assisting in the defense there. This is going to be over. Also, his rooks, they can't go here safely. This is guarded by the bishop. c2 is just undefended. I could take it. So he's dead to rights here if this happens. All those open lines, right? I mean, we haven't even really spoken about like this double attack on d5. There's just too much stuff for white to deal with here. So he tried to throw something in my way on the file. So bishop f4, he plays bishop c5. And now I'll ask you guys again. What would you do here if you were black? You got to play in the spirit of the attack. Again, we're down 3 pawns. But we have this very nice, dangerous initiative going. How am I going to further prosecute this? Yep, that's good feedback, Amsteras. I'll probably do that in the future. This is kind of an experimental stream for teaching. Hey, Shanzo, good to see you. So we're considering this position, black to move. What should black do? You take the rook. It is tempting. It is tempting. And you often face this dilemma when you're attacking, right? Because you're attacking, and especially if you invest material, naturally you're going to be thinking, should I try to get some back at some point? There's that pressure to recoup some of your losses. But you don't want to sell out too cheap. If you've got a strong attack, it may not be in your best interest to take the material and simplify the position. Shadow Lord said something interesting. Rook e5, g5. That is interesting. That's not a maneuver I don't think I can consider that during the game, but that is interesting. Thanks, Eat Cheese. Maybe I will someday. So far, I see one person who has the right idea, although he didn't flesh it out in its entirety. Ooh, now 2 people have the right move. Yeah, I was real hesitant to part with my dark square bishop. I felt like this was such a strong attacking piece. That long-term pressure on h2. I think I would still be doing pretty well after bishop takes c1. He'd take with the knight most likely because he wants to keep d5 defended. And then that does make way for the knight to come into f4, but there's something stronger. Yeah, okay. So I see at least 3 people who got it right here. Deep Fluke said something takes d5. He was the first one to point this out. Portal Panther, very good. He said knight takes d5. And Gaussian Eliminator, he gave a relevant line. He said knight takes d5 with the idea knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, rook takes, and then take here. Yeah, so knight takes d5 is the strongest here. And it's real nice how I'm able to use multiple pieces in the attack. So I take this. Main reason I'm doing this, try to get rid of the defender of e2, quite simply. That bishop is still vulnerable. I still have my eyes set on that. I get rid of the defender. Also side benefit, one less thing in the way leading towards f3 and his king, right? So this was a real nice one to play. And I still keep bishop takes c1 available if I ever need that. So yeah, if he takes, as Gaussian Eliminator said, bishop takes. I could also take on e2 right away, which is probably also quite strong, since that threatens h2. If he takes, yeah, I mean, even bishop takes f3 is probably good here, but I think I just take here, and this is annihilation on the light squares. Double attack, h2 still weak. I'm actually not sure in this position if knight takes is played, which way is stronger. They probably both win. I think rook takes e2 is probably better, though. That looks more straightforward. Because if bishop takes d5, maybe white can somehow defend this with the queen and try to hold on for dear life. Like, I don't know, let's just say queen here. Looks very bad, though. Very, very bad. But yeah, I think just rook takes e2 is simple enough. Knight takes d5, rook takes e2. It's too much. So yeah, after knight takes d5, as War of Ideas pointed out, knight e4 seems basically forced. So he did play this. And now I did take on c1. So bishop takes c1. Because I wanted to use that f4 square for my knight. This knight in particular, if I could jump in here, that would be great. So I'm thinking if he takes it, either knight or rook, let's say rook, knight here, I'm hitting this. Two pieces are attacking here. This is just beautiful for black. Everything's streaming into the position. Also h3 is under attack. So now I do cash in. Bishop takes. And now he didn't take back, actually. Probably saw what I was trying to do here. So he, somewhat desperately and understandably, tries to go on the counterattack. He plays bishop c4. Bishop c4. So attacking the knight on d5. Finally getting his bishop off of that passive e2 square. So, final question for you guys in this game. What's the cleanest way for black to bring this game home? What should I do? This is all about the Hedgehog, K. Schinkel. Yeah, we're looking at 3 games. This is the first of the 3. Just a little tutorial on the Hedgehog. What it is, how to handle it, what the typical plans are. So black to move here. War of Ideas says knight df4. Joe Cal says bishop e3. Non-locality says rook takes e4. He just wants to take that knight off the board. Braden Laughlin says rook c5. Sega Genesis Reborn says knight c3. Wow, we got a lot of candidate moves here. Again, one person is correct. One person so far has said the right move. Yeah, my pleasure, K. Schinkel. He says he wants to play the Sicilian Khan. This game came from a Khan move order, so you can go back later and look at this. You'll see. Yeah, Sicilian Khan is a great opening to get lots of hedgehogs. Okay, we got other suggestions. Queen f4. f5. Ooh, f5 would be reckless. I mean, we got to understand what he's trying to do with this bishop c4 move. Not only is he trying to attack the knight twice, but if I move this knight, I got to be careful I don't run into queen takes g6 and just general problems on this diagonal. So yeah, like that knight c3 suggestion, I can see why you're doing that. Like, that's clever tactically. If knight c3, knight takes, there's bishop takes f3 check, and you have to give up his queen. But it runs straight into queen takes g6, yes. So, oh, by the way, this stream gives me a good chance to announce I have like a couple chess.com memberships to give away each month. That's one cool thing about my partnership with chess.com. I have a couple memberships. So I'd like to give some of those, especially to people who are really good in the chat, like suggesting good ideas and stuff, really active. And because this person is the only one I've seen who actually played the best move here or suggested the best move, I'm going to award a membership to this person if they don't already have one on chess.com. So Jokel, 17, you said bishop e3. Come on down and collect your prize. Just get in touch with me after the stream or I'll whisper you on Twitch. Bishop e3 is very strong here. Nice idea. Anyone else see this move? Bishop e3. It's a great interference move. And we just withdraw the bishop safely, so no longer have to worry about the bishop falling on c1. But if he takes it, I can play rook takes c4. And I'm going to recoup all my material with advantage. Yeah, so again, Domo says, thought he could just take it. But yes, I'm very happy to do this. And white's weaknesses are too much. Also materially, white is just down a rook for a couple ragged pawns here, right? Because he's sacrificing a whole rook by not taking my bishop back. So when I play bishop takes c1, he's not recapturing. He's relying on a counterattack and these two pieces hanging, maybe even g6 hanging. So bishop e3, like smack right there. And yep, I'm trying to just simplify the position. He can't play queen takes g6 because I take. There's no crashing through on d5 yet. So bishop e3. He moved his queen. He played queen g4. I think several ways to get the job done here as black. I decided that knight e5 fit the bill. And this is in line with this great activity I've been showing this game. And some of you guys think I'm just a positional fuddy-duddy. I like to just win in the endgame. You're like, oh, John's always trying to just convert small advantages. He's so lame. He plays like d4, knight f3 on move 1. You guys can see how I handle the initiative when I get going. All right, so knight e5, hit the queen, hit the bishop, fork. Knight f6, we got that square sufficiently covered, so no need to worry about this knight coming in. There's a lot of action going on in the center, I know, but black is getting the better of the confusion here. So queen h5. And now I just collect the bishop. Knight takes c4. And simply put, he's running out of ammunition here. Big time. So now he's down a rook and a piece. All four of my minor pieces are still remaining, by the way. He takes on d5. Just kind of desperation. Can't really get anything going around my king. I mean, there's no sacrifice here. If he tries to go knight g5, I can just take it with the bishop. Not even allow a check on f7 or h7. So he takes, I take, he takes here. And now I was able to wrap it up with one last nice move. I mean, this position's overwhelming, but let's do this again. Like, final question on this game. I know I said the last question was final. What do you think is the best way to get this done here? Black to move. Just up an absolute grip of material, like two rooks against a knight, basically, but what to do? Lots of people saying queen f4. That does look pretty strong, I got to admit. But I like those of you who suggested rook d8 even more. Rook d8, yes. Does it matter which rook you play to d8? Probably not. I think either rook works. I think I went with this one for aesthetic reasons. Rook's on the open file. But yeah, rook d8, please take my knight. He resigned. But the idea is if he takes, I check on the back rank. King g1, and we have this nice tidy checkmate, rook g1, supported by that bishop. So, yep, he threw in the towel right here after rook cd8. So this is my favorite game that I've ever played in the Hedgehog. Helps when you win, right? It makes it easier for it to become your favorite game. But what I especially like about this game is that I was able to demonstrate multiple standard plans, and I think I handled the initiative quite well. And also showcased how when you have an initiative, it's sometimes better to continue attacking, continue creating threats, rather than immediately trying to cash in your material or win material back. So just to hit some of the highlights, this is definitely the game that we're going to spend the longest on. The other two will be pretty quick. But so the Hedgehog, you set the pawns up like this on the 6th rank in exactly this formation, e6, d6. b6, a6. That's the minimum that you have in a hedgehog usually. All these pawns are necessary. You need all of these squares on the 5th rank covered because you want to prevent any sort of incursion by your opponent here. If one thing is out of place, it can totally mess it up. Like say your pawn's here. Well, then the d5 square is absolutely ripe for white to use, probably with one of their knights. Same thing with a5. If that pawn's there for whatever reason, or more likely just back on a7, you're really going to be hurting on b5. So you're setting your pawns up here, and that's an investment in your future because then you can maneuver your pieces and hopefully break open the position, or if white decides to break open, be in a good position yourself to have a lot of counterattacking potential when you finally roll up out of that ball. So yeah, you want the pawns like this, and this is the optimal minor piece arrangement too. Remember, we don't want this knight on c6 where you're potentially running into knight d5 and c-file pressure issues. We want this bishop unencumbered where it could support d5. This bishop, sometimes I mentioned there's kind of a hybrid variation where you can try to stick it on g7. That leaves d6 a little more vulnerable, so don't do that unless you really know what you're doing in this line or have studied this. And then what are we doing with the major pieces? Well, I was talking about how one rook almost always comes to c8. The other rook usually better off on e8 because when d5 is played, you want that rook active down the file. Remember how I had that bishop on e2, that white bishop on e2 in my sights? That was real nice, putting the rook on e8 and having that come to fruition later. Also the queen coming back to b8 because if we're going to initiate stuff with d5 or b5 later, then we don't want anything to happen, again, to the queen down this file. And then from here, we saw two major plans in this line. The samish maneuver, named after Fritz Samish. Bishop d8, bishop c7. He was the first guy to show the potential of the queen bishop on this diagonal. Really adds more emphasis to d5. And we also saw h5, this unexpected h-pawn push to further disturb white on the king side. Okay. And again, I think we're not talking too much right now about what white can do differently, but I would say that some of these moves are too wishy-washy from white. Too defensive, like king h1, queen g1. That seems like an extravagant plan to me. I kind of get the idea, like shoring this up, trying not to weaken himself too much, but white should really be focusing more heavily on the queen side or the center. And white's queen side play never got off the ground. He did play b4, but nothing significant happened after this. Final thing I'll mention, when I get that thematic d5 break-in, remember, you're usually not playing this move simply to trade. You're playing it to unleash the potential of your pieces, maybe sacrifice a pawn even, as happened here, where I was down 2 and then 3 pawns after he took on b6, but I just had so many tactics working in my favor, it was one-way traffic. Any questions on this game or anything I went over here before we move on to the next game? Potzer to Master says, are we going to see one from white's perspective? I often see it on the white side of the position. Yeah, the last game I'm going to show you, I might put it from white's perspective just to show why white's strategy was superior than what happened in this game. Have I ever seen Karpov versus Anderson in the Hedgehog? Yes, I was actually talking about that game with rook takes e3. Ulf Anderson sacked the exchange and had long-term pressure. Yeah, that's a nice game. That's a good one, as Joe Call just said. Why do you ask me, says John, what if white pushed his queenside pawns earlier in the game? Yeah, he probably should try to do that. Again, we'll get to that in the last game. Old Bluesman just subscribed with Twitch Prime. Thanks, Old Bluesman. Appreciate the support. I think I missed a resubscription from Garshad Gaming. Yep. A loyal viewer right there. Thanks, Garshad. Not to be confused with Greg Shahadi. Garshad. Yeah, this was an OTB game. This was played at classical time controls, or a classical time control. I think it was game 90 plus 30. This is back in 2011. And this is my opponent's FIDE rating and my FIDE rating. Why did I say that I don't really trust it? Well, you are giving up a lot of space in the Hedgehog. And when things go wrong in the Hedgehog, they tend to go really wrong. At least in my experience. You can get suffocated. The position can open up poorly for you and just completely backfire. So you got to know what you're doing. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the most fun openings that I've ever played. Or setups, again. I hesitate to use the word opening when describing it because it is flexible. But it's double-edged. And any double-edged line that you're playing, setup, you run the risk of getting crushed sometimes too. Okay, let's go on to the next game. Doesn't seem like there's too many questions here. One last question. Chelsea asked, what if after h5, bishop g5? So I assume you meant h5 by me. Yeah, so this was the moment. Yeah, again, that's a good question. I think that's probably better than what white did because white was pretty cooperative this game. He just let me throw this h-pawn down the board, but I was alluding to the fact that white should probably try to disrupt that plan somehow. So bishop g5, yep, you're right. At least they control here. How would I adjust to this move? Not completely sure. I remember considering that as well by white in the game. Trying to do this. I mean, I could try to play knight h7 and kick the bishop back. But if he just plays like bishop h4, then I have a big dilemma on my hands. Do I really want to go for g5 here? Not completely out of the question, but maybe I play knight e5 at this point, try to go g6, and then renew the threat of h4. That's probably what I would have done. Yeah, knight h7 looks like the most direct to me here. But good question. Men the Gown says, suggest doing the Jinji Indian someday. He said, thanks for the stream. Yeah, that's a good one. I think that would be a good topic of discussion as well. All right, so let's go to the next game. So this next game I'm including for illustrative purposes. We're not going to exhaustively analyze this one, but I wanted to show another major plan. And I also wanted to show how a fantastic player in chess history, one of the best, played this setup. Okay, so here's the game. We're going to look at it from white's perspective. So we have Bobby Fischer against Ulf Andersson. This game was played in 1970 at, I believe, the Siegen Olympiad in Germany. And Fischer decides to play the Hedgehog, but with white. And he opens with b3, as he did on occasion. I think this is his most famous b3 victory. But yeah, once in a blue moon, he would open with this move. So b3, e5. Ulf Andersson, of course, known for being super solid, so perhaps Fischer just wanted to try to get Ulf to start thinking very early in the game. Andersson must have been very young when this game was played because he's still around and occasionally playing tournaments. So yeah, I think he was quite young at the time this game was played. This was 2 years before Fischer won the world championship. So bishop b2, knight c6, c4, knight f6, and e3. And already you can see the contours of the Hedgehog. If ever Ulf plays d5, Fischer's going to trade for that pawn, put the pawn on d3, and he's just one more pawn move away at that point from setting up the spiny quills of the Hedgehog, but in reverse from the white side. Nish of Death, thanks for the 100 bits. So e3, Andersson plays bishop e7, a3 again, like still looking for the same setup. Castles, queen c2, rook e8, d3, bishop f8. So I'd say solid moves by black, perhaps not the best moves. One major difference compared to the last game, if you've already spotted this, good job. Black does not have this pawn up on c5, as white did with the pawns on e4, c4. So that is going to kind of hurt Andersson coming up here because this pawn would much prefer to be in front of the knight. I actually talk about that in my Chess Fundamentals series. I talk about how that represents like a happy marriage. Pawn in front of the knight on the c-file like that. Here you kind of lose some of your dynamic potential in return. For instance, white might not have as many problems on the queen side because of that. So Fischer plays knight f3. And maybe for that reason, and I bet in hindsight, like Andersson perhaps regrets playing d5 soon as he does. So first he plays a5, Fischer plays bishop e2, and now d5. I wonder if he could go back in time and he had this position if he would not play d5 and enter like a pure hedgehog formation with the c and d pawns traded. So maybe just like d6 and bishop to f5, some sort of development like that. Stay solid, keep maneuvering. But he plays d5. We get the trade. And now knight bd2. And This is the same setup that I played last game, just colors reversed. Pawn setup on the 3rd rank this time, but still controlling all those key squares. Knights harmoniously placed. This bishop on the best diagonal. Perfect. Perfect hedgehog. So black plays f6, further supporting e5. Castle. Bishop here. Okay, now, so Fischer could go about playing this position just like I did in the last game. Not that I was the first one by any means to come up with that setup. Those setups are well known. Again, if you're really interested in the hedgehog, I would once more refer you to that 2-volume series by Sergei Shipov, The Complete Hedgehog. It's really good. There's also a book on the Sicilian Khan by Johann Helston called Play the Khan, where I learned many of these plans, like the bishop d8 maneuver or the h-pawn push. So yeah, he could do what I did in the last game. Rook c1, rook e1, queen here, maybe look for the samish maneuver. But Fischer, he goes his own way, and he illustrates what has come to be known as a plan synonymous with him, which is he plays king h1. Completely weird move. Why play king h1? Well, someone already anticipated it. Deep fluke, maybe he's seen this game before. But yeah, white's going to go rook g1 and g4. So again, using a kingside pawn to assault the enemy king. We, in the last game, used the h-pawn. But here, Fischer's going to go rook g1, g4, and actually try to double up the rooks on the g-file. Play rook g3, and then swing this other rook all the way over. Line up the heavy guns against black's king. So very good plan to know, and it works out just brilliantly in this game. Interestingly, I think Fischer has done this before in a slightly different position. I don't think it was exactly a hedgehog position, but I want to say I saw him play the black side of a Sicilian where he did like this exact same thing previous game. I'll have to look that one up. I know I saw it at one point. So king h1, Anderson plays queen d7, rook g1, rook a d8. I mean, from black's perspective, it doesn't really look like he's done anything wrong if we flip the board. Like, this looks pretty logical. But the hedgehog is such a flexible setup. I sometimes feel like playing against it, you lack a clear direction. Because you don't really have any good pawn breaks, and even if you do have a pawn break, it seems like black is always well placed for it. And I mentioned how the other side who's playing against the hedgehog, so in this case black, usually they're best off playing on the queen side. And because that pawn is not up here, it's much harder for black to do that in this case. I don't really see a good way to do it. I mean, you can't really push the b pawn and weaken your knight further. That doesn't seem to make much sense. Leaves a lot of weaknesses. Weakens c5 too. So yeah, I don't like this version of it for black, even though I don't think theoretically black should be doing all that bad here yet. It looks much easier, more natural to play white, especially if you have a clear plan in mind like Fischer does. But for the moment, he can't play g4, or at least he's probably not going to with black having the bishop and the queen looking at this square. So first he plays knight e4, eyeing the c5 square. And maybe in reaction to that move, Anderson decides to play queen f7. I wonder if the idea there is if knight c5, he's planning on playing bishop c8, withdrawing the bishop so he doesn't have to part with one of his bishops and guarding b7. Even this looks kind of passive to me, but perhaps that was his reason for playing queen f7. But that gives Fischer the green light to play g4, which he does now, g4. And this is a nice move. Obviously, he can look to play g5 in the future and try to break up black's position, but don't underestimate the clamp he gets on the f5 square. That could be a very useful transfer point for one of his knights, if he ever does this. B. Nove asks, would f5 be an option instead of rook d8? So, yeah, it's just really tough for black to change the pawn structure, because if you play f5, like suddenly this pawn's lacking a key defender, right? White has two attackers, knight and bishop, so I think white just snaps this off. Yeah, so that would be an overreaction. Also, if black plays f5 when the knight's on e4, so in this position, I think that just invites, this position here, that just invites too much counterplay. This knight coming in here, or again to c5. Yeah, even g5 looks tempting. There's still this threat now. Also, I'd love to win your light square bishop. So, I think probably this queen f7 move isn't so good, and it leads to some of the problems black experiences, but already, not a big fan of black's position. So g4, Anderson plays g6. And I think one reason for that is if g5, he can play f5 a little more comfortably. He doesn't have to worry about white playing g6 in the future. So g6, but now there's a bit of a lull, and Fischer can try to make use of this rook. So he plays rook g3, looking to double up on the g-file. Again, line up the big guns. Deep Fluke says f5 square, nice outpost. Yep, that's exactly right. Thanks to the Trooper. So he's been loving the content lately. Yeah, I might upload this to YouTube, M. Louis. I'll see how it turns out. You can also watch it here on Twitch, just in my archive. So rook g3, plays bishop g7. I guess that's one other idea of g6, just make way for the bishop to come here. He's probably hoping to contest this bishop on the diagonal someday, maybe also further protect his king. Rook g1. Black plays knight b6. And now the knight is coming into c5 with even greater effect because black's bishop is not here. So yeah, he plants the knight in, hitting this, attacking b7 as well. Anderson plays bishop back to c8, trying to hold everything together. And now knight h4. So clearly looking for knight f5. He wants to unleash those rooks down the g-file, perhaps even at the expense of the knight. If after takes, we take back, yeah, both rooks bearing down on the bishop. So just pretty unpleasant. You can see that now, black's space advantage, I don't even think it really exists anymore. White has gained a lot more space and especially pushed black's pieces back into more passive positions. And now the computer hates Anderson's next move. It was claiming that the position was still about even here, which I was a little surprised by, because again, this just looks like much easier for white. I kind of hesitate to say better necessarily if the computer is giving like 0.00 as it was here, but the computer was saying black should play king h8 in this position, which does look pretty natural because if black wants to avoid problems down the g-file, that move makes perfect sense. Also free up the g8 square, but still, like I would take white here in a second, regardless of what the computer says. Anderson plays knight d7, like hoping to trade that knight on c5. But now the knight comes back to e4. Interesting that even though this game started out as a position, a setup where white was more cramped with the hedgehog, now white is avoiding piece trades because I think he knows he has a lot of initiative. He's trying to use the same strategy I was talking about later on when the position opened up. Keep more pieces on board. If our pieces are attacking more effectively, then why trade? Why trade with the opponent? So knight e4. Anderson plays knight f8. And now here the hammer is laid down. Knight f5. So finally we get this knight jumping in. And yeah, if takes here, takes, yes, white is down a knight temporarily, but many of the open lines could definitely benefit white. There's even sometimes bishop h5 you have to take into consideration, but let's just explore this. So if takes, got to admit I didn't analyze this line properly when I kind of loaded this game just to show this plan, but let's try to figure out how white would play this. I assume he's going to take on g7 right away because black is ready to put a piece here. So let's say takes, 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 and takes. So now materially white is down a little bit, but undeniably black's king looks far weaker. And white still has this very valuable dark square bishop. Knight c5 definitely comes to mind still. I mean, you start thinking about f4, trying to weaken this f6 square. Some people are saying knight f6 first. So, which position? Before rook takes queen. So you mean here? Ah, yeah, good point. Okay, I see what you guys are talking about now. Yeah, take here. That's right. Yep, and then that's not possible because of this. Very good point, guys. So black moves, and then we're taking the queen and then taking on e8. Yes, I think you guys are right. Black and Gold 09, thank you for the subscription. 2 months in a row, appreciate it. So yeah, clearly if you're going to play knight f5, that's a line that you have to look at in advance, but let's go over that one more time. So take. Right, and if bishop takes, I think that line is working fine. Otherwise, it still looks tough. Like even if black plays king h8, we have the capture on g7 where we get to keep the f5 pawn. Also tempting to look at bishop h5. Like, I want to make this move work somehow, especially in light of this. And if takes, there's mate on g8. But again, I admit I've not looked at this completely all the way through, and it gets tactical here. Probably pretty good for white, I imagine. Like if queen takes f5, just take. There's a check here. Just block, but white is still threatening mate, even if this knight is captured. And if this knight moves, there's a mate on h7. Black has to do something ridiculous like this. It seems like it must be losing somehow. So if you want, you can play around with those tactical lines, but yeah, knight f5 dropping into the position. Anderson did not even take that. So he played bishop e6, hitting the pawn on b3. But the knight came here to c5, hitting the bishop, also defending. Knight here. And now he just decides to just take the bishop on g7. Valuable piece to get. We have the bishop pair. And with g5 coming next, weakening these pawns, this bishop is going to have a field day soon. So black played knight f5, rook f3, no rush. b6, take. King h8, he's going to try desperately to keep the diagonal closed, the position closed. Now Fischer takes the other bishop. Rook takes. And now this very nice move, d4. This is just like d5 in the previous game, opening lines at the right time, allowing for this bishop to come out. So the idea, try to get the bishop to c4 and pin this rook on e6. Also, we're threatening to take here. So black does take. Bishop c4. Bishop, pawn d3, trying to kind of allow for some sort of defense, but he has to sack the exchange. Yeah, I mean, the position is now opening up clearly in white's favor. So take. And this was just a mop-up job. Fischer's up material. Black still has a lot of tactical issues. Game went on for about 10 more moves, but didn't matter. Pushes the h-pawn, weaken the king further. Not going to be winning a game against Fischer down material with this sort of setup, as I'm sure Ulf Andersson was well aware. e4 probably played to just guard this. Also maybe guard the d5 square. Swings the rook over. f4, even the other f-pawn gets involved, threatening f5. Creeping into the position, queen h6. Yeah, and black resigned. So, I wanted to show this one again because of this Fischer plan with king h1, rook g1, g4, doubling up the rooks here. Another way that white can, or whichever side is playing the hedgehog, can cause problems for the enemy king. In addition to the whole samish maneuver and the h-pawn push, if you want to entertain that plan too. Hey, Kerpap. All right, any questions on this game? Fischer made it look easy, right? And again, from like a psychological perspective especially, I think I would really hesitate to play d5 here. Just the fact alone that Fischer seemed completely gunning for a hedgehog from the beginning would make me want to hold off on the d-pawn push, try to keep the position a little more closed. And I think this version with black having the pawn back on c7 versus c5 just means it's much harder for black to get something going on the queen side. I agree, Deep Fluke. Hey, Griffin. Mend the Gown says, seems c5 was needed for black. Yep, I am inclined to agree, yes. Otherwise, it was just very passive. Yeah, I mean, again, you take a look at that position after the rook comes to d8. Let's look at it again from black's point of view. I mean, if you feed this to the engine, it's probably going to say equal or close to it. But I don't see a good plan for black here. I really don't. And it's mainly because his structure is less flexible. When there's this many pieces on the board and it's still closed, it's going to be about the structure and how you maneuver. And both of those things seem more difficult for black. He's got a more problematic structure, even though it looks okay. There's just not really any breaks or any way you can change the structure favorably. And white can maneuver better here. We know he already has this plan on the way if he gets the chance. And he might even do it with this queen-bishop battery. He didn't play it here, but it's possible even in some of these lines, white might be able to do some sort of knight takes e5 business at some moment. Again, I don't think it works exactly right away. But Fischer would surely keep that in mind. JoeCal17, just whisper me on Twitch, and I'll set you up with that chess.com membership. It might take a day or two because I got to have Danny get it to you, I guess. But yeah, just whisper me on Twitch or send me a tweet or something. And if I don't see it, I'll send you one. Okay, let's look at the final game. So we saw one game of mine where I won with the Hedgehog. We saw this Fischer game. Now let's see a game that I lost on the black side of a Hedgehog. Spoiler alert. But one where I was really impressed by how my opponent played from the white side against this opening. So let's actually show it from my opponent's point of view. Arbor Vite says, forgive me if you said this, John, but it seems that black / the opponent needs to punish the Hedgehogger in the early game, take the initiative, and punish the lack of space, because otherwise, as you said, the Hedgehog is flexible with many tools and threats. Yeah, I'd say that's actually a pretty good summary of it, Arbor. And that's why, in this game, I think white had a plan from the get-go. It is very much about how you set up for the first 10, 15 moves in this opening. And yeah, if you don't have some tools in your toolbox also from the side playing against the Hedgehog, you can easily just wind up like how Ulf Andersson wound up in that last game. Decent looking position, but no plan, and you're just wondering how your opponent killed you. Neil Bruce, cheered 100 bits. Says, hi, John, great to see you. Hope you had a great lesson with Stacia. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Neil. Okay, so this is the last game we're going to look at. And again, showing it from my opponent's perspective. So this game was played, I think, in 2013 in the Minnesota Close Championship, which is our state championship. It features 6 players. You have to qualify, and it's a round-robin tournament. So you play 5 games, 6 players total, play everyone once. And it's also played about 2 weeks, I think, after the pairings come out. So you can actually prepare kind of extensively for your opponents. I played Andrew Tang. I played Sean Nagel several times in this tournament. We're usually in there gunning for the title of Minnesota state champion. So perhaps, I mentioned that because perhaps I should not have played the Hedgehog in this game, because I think my opponent was anticipating it. He really seemed to know what he was doing in this opening, and I did not get a good position out of the opening. So let's take a look at it. So playing Scott Reister. I don't know if he's an FM. He might be. But yeah, 2275 FIDE at the time this game is played. Oh, thanks, Nidzuya. Really appreciate that. So once again, we get into the Hedgehog via a Sicilian move order. So this is the pure Khan move order. And he plays c4. Knight f6. Knight here. Note that e5, while tempting looking, is a mistake because black can react with queen a5 check. Black does not have to move this knight. This is a theme that you should know whether you're on the white or the black side of the Sicilian. That's a fork, and black just picks up that center pawn. So don't do that. So he plays knight c3. So because of this game, and also sort of the evolution of the theory in the Sicilian Khan move order, I've started playing bishop b4 a bit. I had a game against a French grandmaster, Sébastien Mazet, at the London Chess Classic back in, when was it, 2016, I think, where I played this move and he reacted with queen d3, guarding this pawn. There's quite a bit of theory here. I think this is playable for black, but also here black has to know what they're doing. This is one of the trendier lines for white to try to take advantage of the Sicilian Khan. So in this game, though, I just played queen c7, which is the standard position for the queen. And he plays a3, so now he stops bishop b4 from happening. So b6. We had some requests to show it from the white perspective, black and gold. So I'm going to show it from white's point of view, but I'll probably flip it around for a second. So yeah, now we're seeing white playing against the hedgehog. But the first many moves are basically the same as in that first game where I was playing Hans Scoot. Yeah, thanks, Henry. See you later. So f3 just defends this pawn. And I set up the usual hedgehog, right? So the pawn's on the 6th rank, exactly where we want them. He goes rook c1, b4. So already he's being noticeably more decisive in terms of positioning on the queen side. He's pushing his queenside pawns, and I was criticizing my opponent in the first game for not doing that fast enough. So whoever said that, Arbor Vitae, was talking about how maybe white should play more aggressively or really think about what they're doing in the opening. You can see that my opponent's doing a good job of that already. So b4, I castle. He plays bishop e2. I just play knight bd7. Castle. Rook c8. Queen d2. Okay, so I'll flip it just for a second just so you can see that I, as black, I have the same exact setup that I had in that first game. And also the same exact setup as the Fischer game, with colors reversed, with the only exception that Fischer didn't play his rook here. Remember, he instantly went for this, here, the idea of that. Although, it's a little different, though, if I were to go for that plan here, because white has the pawn on c4, which Anderson didn't. He didn't have that pawn up on c5. All right, so white played queen d2. I played the queen back to b8, just getting the queen off the file. And now here, my opponent played a clever move. And this is a standard move. You definitely want to know this if you're combating the hedgehog. I was talking about that samish maneuver, right? Which is definitely on after you play queen b8. So if white were to play the move that my opponent did in that first game, so just rook f d1, logical move, I think I probably would have played this right away. Bishop here, and sent the bishop to this square. But does anyone see how white can maybe disrupt that plan, or at least make me think twice about doing it? So if you were white and wanted to try to disrupt or deter bishop d8 to c7, what would you do? Oh, thank you, GDK. Hello, Bird Potzer. I have no idea what you just said there. Something in French. Something about you being Luigi and you like my videos. Halvard, thank you for the host. Okay, so we got some suggestions here. Men the Gown said bishop d1 to c2. That's clever. You want to copy the samish maneuver? That seems to drop this pawn. So yes, I would not recommend that. Joe Cal says bishop f4. Same with Dawabo. This is bishop f4. JC Sill says knight b3. Deep Fluke says rook c2. Yeah, you know, bishop f4, I kind of like the direction you guys are thinking. It does invite e5, although admittedly there's knight f5. Bishop f4 is kind of the right idea, but I think the move order can be improved. So JC Sill predicted the move that white played here, knight b3. Knight b3, yes. So it does have something to do with the d6 pawn, definitely. But knight b3 is a very good multi-purpose move. So it allows the queen and also the rook, if it comes to the d file, to have access to the d6 pawn. It allows the bishop to pester the b6 pawn. It's always staring at that. And there's one other major benefit of this move. Does anyone know what this is? It's kind of a future plan for white on the queen side. So how does knight b3 help that? Hey, GM Canty. Is that James Canty? James Canty from Michigan. Kerpap, thank you for the subscription. Okay, so a couple people. Camel Clutcher says A4, A5. RPG says C5 in the future. Archmage also said A4, A5. Yep, exactly. A4, A5. It really assists in this assault using the queenside pawns, getting at B6 precisely. Very good, guys. And it could help with C5 sometimes, you're right. But yeah, the real redeeming value on the queen side is allowing this so that if takes, he can take with the knight, jump the knight in. And honestly, this is one plan that has really put me off of this particular position, and even honestly, like kind of this move order for black. I haven't really found a good solution to this plan from black's point of view. And I think, I don't know for certain, but my impression is that white is going to get there on the queen side a little faster than black can get there with the kingside stuff or the maneuvers or the d5 break. There's been a lot of games to reach this position. This was not a new move or anything. But just to illustrate some of the problems, so let's just say black plays bishop d8 here, kind of the standard move. Well, now I think white's going to play rook fd1, target this pawn. Black gets to play bishop c7. What's the big deal, right? Like, didn't black get to execute the samish maneuver? But now comes this move bishop f4. And this is really annoying and what I didn't want to have happen in the game. Because that attacks d6 again. I really don't want to play knight e8. Like, that just looks way too passive to me. It's going to disrupt my coordination. The rooks are not speaking to each other. d6 is guarded, but this just looks too passive. Probably white will continue with the plan of a4, a5. So there's several games where after this bishop f4 move, black plays knight e5. But it's been my experience that after this trade, so kind of paradoxical, giving up the bishop for the knight, parting with the bishop pair, that black gets kind of clogged up. And the queen and bishop on this diagonal are hindered by black's own pawn. The bishops are not as big of a deal as they normally would in a hedgehog. Black loses a lot of their dynamic potential this way with this structure. And white's queenside majority, much more noticeable. Like, white can play c5 here. I have a game played by Radoslaw Wojtasek, Polish, very strong Polish player, like 2650s, 2700 in that range, maybe even over 2700. And he managed to win this position as black, but I've looked at this with the engine before. I don't think it's good. I think black's a little bit too bottled up here. I don't trust this position. So that's the explanation why knight b3 makes the samish maneuver harder to implement, because white gets immediate pressure against d6. Again, that line, bishop d8, rook d1, bishop here, puts the bishop on f4 opposing this. D5 is definitely not going to be effective here. And white can think about this transformation where you take the knight, but it's very hard to attack because black's pawns block him, especially that pawn on e5. It is James Canty. Cool. Hope you're doing well, man. Thanks for tuning in. Potster Master says, what happens if black goes after the c-pawn with knight e5 ideas? Well, the c-pawn is sufficiently guarded, right? And we just saw knight e5 here. Again, I don't think white would hesitate to take the knight with the bishop if necessary to try to get the queenside pawns properly moving. So yeah, this is just a tough move. I think black is worse after knight b3. I mean, I'd love to hear any sort of improvement from here. You'll see what happened in the game, but I remember thinking for quite a while after this move, and I didn't come up with anything good here. Hey, Dragon Mates. I'm doing great. Good to see you. Rat Deal says a4 is hard to accomplish for white if you quit on the samish idea because of d5, and removing the knight from c3 to cover b4 is always a bit odd. Okay, so let's see what happened. So I played bishop a8. I gave this a dubious symbol in my notes. I don't think it's good. I think I played it as a semi-waiting move, and also anticipating a4, a5. I think I wanted my queen to be in connection here. Maybe if b5 is going to be played later, there's some value with that. But I think I played this mostly for lack of something better to do. I mean, I saw that whole knight e5, bishop takes e5 thing, and I just didn't like it. But maybe in hindsight, that at least provided some stronger counterplay. So he goes rook fd1. Now I'm definitely not going to get bishop d8 in when he could just take. Although actually, admittedly, he probably wouldn't take because then I have bishop c7. So if this happens, I think it would be the same thing, though. Yeah, it's going to be similar. So rook fd1, I played knight e5. And this was maybe to Potzer to master your question. So yeah, trying to attack the c4 pawn. I did attempt to do that, but he just played knight a4. Now his rook is assisting in the defense, and he's attacking b6 since my knight is no longer there. I tried to reposition a little bit. Knight fd7, guarding that. And he played a nice move here. Knight b2. Withdraw the knight, guarding c4, and again, making way for this. I played rook fd8. I think I put the rook here because I recognized that it would be very hard to get d5 in, so I don't think rook e8 appealed to me as much as normal, but again, usually in the Hedgehog, you want the rook on e8. So this is maybe already a sign that I wasn't doing so well here. Rook here, bishop f1. I play h5, hoping to get him to make some sort of weakness or maybe overreact to the coming h4, h3. But he did well. He played queen f2. Yeah, and this just starts to reveal some issues that I have with this. Like already I have to think about the knight coming back to c4. I played a very awkward move here. Played rook c6. He played h3. So, unlike my previous opponent, I don't think he's going to allow the pawn to get all the way down here. Also controls g4, so after h3 is played, he can think about playing f4. Now, this is a good example. Again, I'll flip it back around to black side so you can kind of see. Like, this is an example of what can go wrong in the Hedgehog. My pieces just look very cumbersome here. I mean, especially this rook c6 move. Like, not a move that you want to make willingly. I should also mention, I think I was sometimes worried about c5 happening here with this being potentially under attack. I mean, just logically, rook c6 looks really bad, but I think I was especially worried about these pawns. And I wasn't thinking my kingside play was going to work out, but... So this is the dark side of the Hedgehog, too. You can get yourself into extremely awkward positions sometimes. He plays rook c2. Again, we'll switch this back around to white's perspective. Rook here. He doubles on the c-file. I played bishop f8, just kind of waiting. Plays king h1, also waiting. I mean, I shouldn't say that black has lost or anything here, but I was just really lacking a good plan. Was not sure what to do. Also, if I try to go for d5 at this point, or anywhere around here, he's really well placed to deal with that by pushing c5. So let's say I play d5 right here. He can take with the e-pawn. I take. And, I mean... I might even have issues even if he takes, and again, like this a6 pawn is looking weak. But I think there's always this idea. This c5 motif is very nice for him. Because that could change the structure in a way that is like vastly favorable to white. So let's say take. Let's just say he takes with the bishop. In the long run, my a6 pawn is probably not gonna last. And I have this isolated d pawn. I'd much rather that pawn like almost not be there, so that my bishop at least has a counterattacking future on this diagonal. And these pawns being weak, it's not good. I need something more than I have. So he plays rook d. I played rook d8, and now finally he plays a4. I think he was happy with his setup. He plays a4. I play my knight back to d7. He goes a5, gets this break in. I take. What other choice do I really have? He's threatening to take, and then play knight a5, and I'm going to have trouble on b6 and c6. Don't really want to push and give him this structure. This is also going to be a nightmare. So b5 is just so weak. So I say, okay, take. Takes here, rook c7. Probably trying to guard a7. Knight here. Rook here, rook b2. You know, there's a lot of like back and forth. Plays his king over to g1. I play g6, bishop d4, rook here. Yeah, and then this was also interesting. So I think I'm trying to goad him into doing something on the queen side, if I remember properly. I knew I was weak over here, but I also thought, you know, he's going to have to take some risks if he wants to open it up. So now he unexpectedly plays on the king side too. He plays g4. It reminds me that, hey, I can attack on this flank as well. Which, again, usually in a hedgehog, like that's not going to work out so well if you try to, as the side playing against the hedgehog, play on the king side. But g4, I think, was actually pretty well timed here. g5 further cramping me is a significant threat, even though this move looks weakening. So I remember at this point, I was running kind of low on time. We were both drifting towards time pressure, and I decided, you know what? Like, I've been staring at this d5 break all game long. This is the standard break. I don't like what's going to happen here probably, but let's just see what happens if I play it. So I play d5, but this is always the response. He takes to the e-pawn, and then he pushes c5. And yes, I get some temporary activity here, but long-term, not good. Weak pawn, much weaker than these guys. Blocked bishop. I went for a radical move here, hoping to change my fortunes in time pressure. I played knight e4. Yeah, looking to open lines, but he just calmly took it. Take. Moved his knight to e1. Yeah, his king's kind of exposed, but I just don't have enough coordination going on to really hurt him here. Rat Deal says, this looks like a textbook game for white so far. Yes, I agree. Yep. Knight e5. Looking at some potential squares over here. But now bishop c4. Reminding me that f7 is weak. Go e3. He just ignores this. I think time control is move 40. We're on move 39 right now. Go rook here. And now he plays rook h2, making time control. Bishop g7 was my last move. But I don't have enough compensation. I only have a pawn for the piece and not enough threats against his king. I'm probably dreaming of someday setting up this battery leading towards the king, much like that Smyslov versus Tall game that I analyzed on my YouTube channel. But with his knight beautifully posted on a5, guarding the square at all times, and even c6, it's not going to happen. Queen c8, trying to attack g4. He retreats and guards that square. Rook d2. I was really trying to make something happen here, guys. So, of course, if he takes it, takes, and then I get the fork here and here, some life. Maybe I can attack on the dark squares. But he kept his calm, kept his cool. He played knight back to c4. Yeah, and also, even though the knight is abandoning these squares, I should mention that he has these guarded, so I can't easily set up a checkmate net. I take. He gives a check. I mean, my alternatives are not good here, right? In addition to him hitting the rook twice now, there's also even knight d6 to reckon with. So, again, pretty desperate, just trying to remove defenders, like somehow get at his king. But he checked here. Yeah, and now, if he takes, there is queen takes g4 check. So he instead plays a smart move. He takes on e5, which guards g4. I take with the rook. I think I lose if I take with the bishop, as I recall. Yes, and there's some nice lines. Like if bishop takes, he can check here. And I think you guys will like this one. If I try to put my king back to safety, what does white play now? Just to make sure you guys are still paying attention and not sleeping through my lecture. Yep. First four answers, 5 answers, 6, 7. You all got it, yeah. Queen h8, that's a nice one. Queen h8, supported by the rook. Yes, take it with the bishop, but then this is a very good checkmate pattern to know. So yeah, I think that was the problem with bishop takes e5. He can check. And I guess therefore I'd have to play king e7, but I must have thought that this was just not going to work. Just trying to remember why exactly, though, because there is this threat on g4 still. Is it queen g5 first? Queen h4. Probably queen h4, actually. Queen h4 check. Defend this pawn. Although, is this like that clear? King here. And then this rook is defending. What But I'm pretty sure it was because of queen h6 that I didn't want to do this. Wonder if it's also possible just to take. Queen takes, and then just go here. I think even that is possible, honestly. It looks risky, but what does black do? Because f3 is guarded. And if queen f5, we can block. That's not so easy, though, also. Oh, no. Queen f5, we can just take. We can just take here. Yeah, again, don't remember exactly my thought process, but after knight takes e5, I took with a rook. Really trying to like throw the kitchen sink at him in hopes of keeping the initiative alive. He took on e2. That's probably, rook takes e2 is probably the easiest solution, right? Like in that position I was looking at. So here, bishop takes, give a check, just to mess with his coordination, and then probably just take here. Yeah, that must be the easiest. Why even bother with that risky looking king f1 thing? Yeah, I think this is much easier, guys. Queen takes g4, just block rook g2. I think white's going to be simply up a piece soon. Again, there's rook h8. There's counterplay. Let's say takes, rook here. But then queen takes e3 is possible. That should be well and truly over with this pin going on. Yeah. Okay, so knight takes e5. He took with the rook, or I took with the rook rather, but rook takes e2. I get in a check. He goes here, blocks, take. He's still up a piece for a couple pawns, but you know, you can see this situation on the diagonal is not good. If I move my rook, I lose the bishop on g7. So here, yep. Now I was down a full rook, and this was just a cleanup job for him. It's guarding d1, so there's no queen d1 shots. King f2. I still tried to make him work for it, but some clever stuff. But yeah, now his queen plus his c pawn. My pawns are not doing anything. It's going to be over once I run out of checks, which I did very soon. Yeah, here, no good checks left to give. Play queen e7, hoping he trades so I can get my king closer to stop the c-pawn, like pick off his c-pawn. But he plays a nice move here. Queen d4, guarding h4, threatening queen h8 mate. Queen e6, c7, and I resigned with this coming. Okay, so this was mainly an illustration of how white can effectively combat this traditional hedgehog move order. Again, this is one of these lines that has caused me to look at other move orders and other subtleties that black can employ. Because I really think this knight b3 plan, trying to either gang up on d6 and maybe trade the dark square bishop for the knight, as we saw in this line, go for this sort of thing, or just in general supporting a4, a5 and looking to break through on the queen side. It's just a beautiful move to support this plan. So if you get on the white side of the hedgehog, hopefully you have your pawn on c4 because that helps you on the queen side, unlike Ulf Andersson as we saw in the other game. And hopefully you can rush with your queenside pawns. Okay, so you can see it's a double-edged opening setup. Again, keep calling it opening, but it's more fair to call it a setup. It's a lot of fun, especially if you know some of these standard plans, but it's by no means bulletproof. Dragonmate says, is this a public analysis board? No, I made it a private analysis board. But I might post the games. One of them, of course, you can find. The Fischer versus Andersson. Ziegen Olympiad 1978. Or 1970, rather. Men the Gown says, hey, John, sorry I missed the beginning. Are there any openings to not play to play against the hedgehog? I'm not sure what you mean. Are there any openings? Oh, so like if you want to avoid playing against the hedgehog? Well, basically don't trade your D pawn for their C pawn is the main thing. Yeah, because when that happens, so like right here, and I was saying in that Ulf Andersson game, maybe Ulf shouldn't go for that, but when you do this, especially in this line, black is going to set up some sort of hedgehog. Even in the main lines of the con, that's usually what black tries to do, that sort of setup. But as Shipa points out in his book, you can't really like force the hedgehog if you're black. Like white or your opponent has to cooperate. So you shouldn't go out of your way to try to get a hedgehog every game. It's not going to happen. I will say when you're playing against the English, you can often get hedgehogs. So like here, especially out of the symmetrical English, if you want to, there's a high likelihood you can get a hedgehog out of this through various move orders. Because this is pretty optimal as far as doing that. Just to illustrate it, for instance, there's like the, what does he call it? I think he calls it like the English hedgehog, where, see if I get the move order right. Let's say knight here. Let's say this. Let's say e6, g3. White often fianchettos here. b6. So you're going to set up a fianchetto against this. Here, castles. So now white's main plan is to go d4, and that's going to lead to the c pawn trade for the d pawn. So usually black goes about trying to set up the hedgehog right away. d6, let's say d4, take with the queen. a6, stopping any knight b5 business. Rook d1. I played this sort of setup from both sides. Here, I think it goes bishop e3, is it? Let's just say bishop e3. Rook c8, b3. Like this sort of thing can happen a lot. So, yeah, you might entertain playing this way as black too. Also, there's a line where black fianchettos the dark square bishop and leaves this pawn back on e7. Okay, so those are the 3 games that I wanted to go over today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to wrap the stream up here. But yeah, let me know what you think about this. You can, it looks like the feedback was positive from what I saw in the chat, but you can send me a tweet. You can leave a comment on my YouTube channel. You can whisper me on Twitch. Just let me know. So maybe we'll do more lessons in the future. Thanks, Timothy P. Connolly. Yep, my pleasure, Tactician Magician. Thanks, Arbor Vitae. GM Canty. Mend the Gown. Yep, thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate it. I'm going to go watch Rockets versus Warriors, which is probably already started by now. They're probably in the first quarter. But yeah, you can check this out. If you missed any of this, you're tuning in late. It'll be here on Twitch. I might put it up on YouTube as well. I'll see how it turns out. All right, guys. Talk to you again soon. I'm going to be streaming tomorrow, by the way. I'm going to be streaming both of the chess.com events this week, the Bullet and the Blitz Arena Kings. So tomorrow and Wednesday. All right. Have a good night, guys, or a good day. See you later.